Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today we're reviewing the new album from Fully Involved, Learned Helplessness. Alright folks, today's review is a bit of a special review because this is just not any typical album that I'm reviewing here today. This was actually made by another YouTuber that I've been watching for a couple of years now, Mark from Spin It Reviews, or what was formerly Spin It Reviews. I believe now it's being rebranded to Mad Sounds, which is the podcast that he's doing now instead of album reviews. And, I've been a fan of his work for a couple of years now, really, when I started getting into YouTube and just reviews, like music reviews in general. So, getting an album that's been kind of teased for a while now was something that really excited me. I've been looking forward to this project ever since he's kind of been teasing it on his channel. And here we are with the final product that I pre-ordered and then started listening to when it was released. And overall, just before getting into the review itself, the link to his channel for Fully Involved is going to be in the description down below, as well as the link to his Bandcamp where you could actually purchase this album, which I highly recommend you do. And, I'm going to go into more detail as to why in this review itself. But yeah, here we are with this new album here, the first album that he's really kind of put out. He's put out some other EPs and just content before, but this is the first real album. And, I was kind of excited to see what it would be like. And overall, if I had to describe the sound of this project, which I'm pretty sure most of you aren't going to be familiar with it, but it's mostly a kind of pop-punk and garage rock, even a bit of a pop rock kind of sound. And what I really mean by that is it manages to incorporate the typical sort of pop-punk sound, I would say, in terms of song structures and things of that sort for the most part, and kind of takes that and has a bit more of a garage rock approach to the sound of it. It sounds a bit rough around the edges here, and I definitely do enjoy that. Of course, that's because this was more of an independently made album. Of course, it was only one person, Mark, who I said before. He was the only real member of this project, really. It's not really a band, it's just him. And then he did have some other musicians involved in some of the other tracks here as well, which are credited in the Bandcamp page, which you could check in the description below. But for the most part, it was a one-man project, which I think is, first of all, really cool. And second of all, it definitely manages to provide a very sort of garage rock sound to this album, which I do really enjoy, because one of the reasons why I'm not a super big fan of modern pop-punk bands is because they just sound very overproduced a lot of times. A bit just, too squeaky clean for my personal taste. And there are some bands that do manage to pull off that sound fine, but for the most part, I'm not really a fan. But this album here, it kind of takes that pop-punk sound and gives it a more rough around the edges type feel, which is very reminiscent of, I feel, some of the earlier pop-punk bands, maybe from the late 80s, early 90s. Think maybe even early Green Day or Blink-182, even The Descendants, some of their poppier type stuff. That's kind of a vibe I get at times from this project on some of the more pop-punk type tracks. There's also some tracks here that go for a more typical sort of alternative rock type sound, but it's still incorporated nicely into the greater existence of this album, and they don't feel really detached, or this album doesn't feel like it has two personalities, the pop-punk sort of personality and the more alternative rock one. The two are kind of mixed together in a very nice way, and that sort of rough around the edges, do-it-yourself sort of feel that this album has really does help kind of bind these two different sounds together in a very nice, mix. Another aspect I like about this album, for the most part, is how lyrically, it not only manages to stay consistent lyrically with dealing with both, modern social issues to a degree, as well as personal issues and things of that sort, but it also manages to talk about these things without sounding, whiny like so many pop-punk bands also seem to struggle with, or sounding pretentious and just, above everyone else like many other punk bands also kind of struggle with, I feel, at times. It manages to sound humble and, very relatable to someone who's listening to this project, even though it is talking about, both personal issues and, larger issues for the most part together. The album begins with the track Wasteland, which I think is a very good start off to this album, because it kind of captures that sort of angry kind of pop-punk sound here on this first track, and gives a lot of energy right at the beginning of this project that kind of hooks you in right from the start. And the lyrics here kind of dealing with, I believe it's kind of he's returning to this place which is kind of a wasteland of sorts. And I do like the kind of commentary that's present here on this track. I think it's pretty cool, and it just provides a very nice intro and just a very nice sort of mood to the start of this project for the most part. I do like the kind of aggressive guitars that we get here, and overall I think it's a pretty good start to this album. And then going on later on, we also see some more sort of typical pop punk type tracks later on, such as the following tracks, The Opinion Disease and The Equator. However, The Equator, I do like the aspect of this track being the ending, how, after this more typical sort of pop punk song that we get, we kind of have this ending that cools things back down a bit, slows things down a little bit more, which I thought was really enjoyable. It doesn't take up too much of the track itself, but it's still a very nice thing that they managed to throw in there, or rather that he manages to throw in there. And that's another thing about this album. Despite the fact that on the surface it may seem like a pretty typical sort of pop punk album in terms of, runtime, the amount of tracks, and things of that sort, some of these tracks manage to do things a bit differently here and there. Not so much that they completely, stray away from this album's general sound, but they manage to keep it in, the general sphere of what's kind of accepted for this album to stay consistent, while, experimenting and doing their own little things that manage to make each of these tracks sort of nuanced and different from each other. Take the track, the closing track, Come Out Right, which is one of my favorites here on the album. I do like how this track is a bit longer. I think it's the closest that anything comes to really sort of epic here on this album. And I do like how it starts off a bit more typical, and, it kind of goes through several phases, this song, I feel, with different sort of, speed changes here and there in the song itself, while still remaining, the same song. It's not like the song kind of starts off one way and completely changes to something else, or it's not like it's being dragged out to this very long length just because, I guess, you maybe wanted a bit of more of an epic track. It manages to fill this longer runtime for a song here on this album by, kind of changing things up every so often, providing some nice guitar parts thrown in there as well. I like the guitar opening and just kind of the riff that's repeated at the beginning of this track. It's overall one of my favorite ones here on the album. It's an excellent closer, and it really shows what a lot that's being done here with, the more typical sort of pop-punk, garage rock type formula. Taking that and kind of experimenting, doing a little bit different with each of these tracks in order to give each one their own personality. The track Accept My Breakdown also stands out to me for being a bit of a slower song that manages to also be really interesting. I like the keyboards that are thrown in here on this track. It gives it a bit more personality. And, once again, it manages to be a slower, sadder type track without being really whiny, that, many other punk bands seem to really struggle with that concept. But here it's done very effortlessly, and it feels very relatable and, just sort of real to someone listening to this project. Overall, I would have to say that this album here, Learn Helplessness, is a very enjoyable sort of pop-punk, garage rock type album. And to be honest, if you're a fan of that type of music, particularly maybe the older styling of pop-punk when it was a bit more, rough around the edges. I know I've been saying that a lot here in this review, but it is kind of what I think of when listening to this album to a degree. And not in a bad way by any means. I just want to stress that. It's, kind of like I said before, it really does kind of help bring out the sort of aggression that's present here on this album and just kind of the natural sort of grittiness, I feel. It doesn't seem super overproduced or, like so many pop-punk bands do, really. It does have a personality of its own. It does have a sort of realness to it. It feels very, just an actual, like, real thing, like, a real problems and things of that sort. It doesn't feel super overproduced to the point where, it's trying to practically be a pop song or anything like that. These are all still very much kind of rock, punk, alternative rock type songs. And even though you do get a very diverse amount of, like, genres that are kind of played around with here in this track listing, the genre of sort of, experimenting doesn't expand to the point where, it's changing things, like, so differently from the rest of the album that it becomes uncomfortable and just makes the album feel very sloppy and inconsistent. All the experimentation, like I said before, was done kind of in the same sphere of the album's general sound and manages to sound very good and consistent all the way through while having a very, each track be its own sort of personality here on this album that stands out to you. Overall, I think this is a very good project. And while, of course, it may not be like the most experimental, crazy, out there project ever released or anything like that, for like a first album made by one person, I think it's a very good job, to be completely honest. And I do like the kind of personality that this album brings overall. I just feel like this album is really filled with a personality of its own that's different than any other sort of pop-punk, alternative rock band out there. And I feel like, in part, that does have to do with it not being a like major release. It's more of an independent sort of project. And I do really like that about this album. Overall, I have to really recommend it to you. And I know that with most bands I've reviewed so far on my channel, they tend to really have large fan bases and things of that sort. But that really can't be said with this project here, at least yet, hopefully. So overall, if you really kind of like what I've described here and you haven't checked this out, I recommend you go check out the Fully Involved channel, which is linked in the description below, like I said before, where you could actually hear some of the songs from this project And if that's something that really appeals to you, definitely recommend buying this album on Bandcamp, like I said before, which is also linked in the description there. Definitely check this project out because it does have a lot of personality to it. It may not be the most, like I said before, professionally produced project released of this year, but, it makes up for that by incorporating that sort of, garage rock aesthetic to the sound of this album overall. I think it's a really good one in my opinion, and I definitely recommend you check it out. So, if you actually have heard this project and you have any opinions on it, comment down below your thoughts, leave a like on the video if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel for more album reviews and things of that sort, music related content, follow me on all the social medias in the description, and stay golden, guys.